Hey, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Thune.
Thank you. I never have a problem hearing you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Stabenow, thanks for having this hearing and giving us an opportunity to catch up on a lot of these issues that are so important to those of us who represent states where production agriculture is a big industry, in the case of South Dakota, the #1 industry. I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the hard work that you and your staff put in getting livestock disaster programs out the door last year. That was a very big issue, critical to South Dakota's livestock industry, and I appreciate your timely and effective response on that particular issue. I want to raise a couple of issues with you. I think you're probably familiar with them already. One of them has to do with mid-contract management of CRP acres. You know, South Dakota producers received letters last year telling them that the residue they remove must be destroyed. Over the years, this has resulted in literally thousands of tons of feed that could have been put to use instead of being burned. I've requested in a letter that you either allow the residue to be donated with no reduction to CRP annual payments, or if used by the participant, that the annual payment reduction be assessed. And you responded in a letter that this concern would be addressed in future CRP policy changes. The question I have is, can you assure me that CRP participants will no longer receive letters requiring them to destroy residue removed during mid-contract management on any CRP practices?
Senator, what I can assure you is that every farm actually has to be, in a sense, analyzed for its own circumstances and condition, which is why we have established and set up a system for an environmental assessment that would give us the range of options that will be available to each landowner. Obviously, each landowner can, and we would certainly encourage them to consider donation. That is an option that is available to everyone. There is an option, obviously, for other utilization of the management, but of course there carries with it a financial penalty, if you will. But if you think about it, if people use it for their own personal purposes, they're saving expense, and we don't want to have a double dipping situation. So there are options available, and I think you know, hindsight's always 20/20. Probably would have been better if we'd been a bit more flexible with our language in the memo that was sent out to producers, but we wanted to make sure that people understood what the rules are.
Yeah, and I totally get. I mean, I understand the whole thing about double dipping, which is why I think they would take a haircut on the payment if they were to use it themselves. But if they were to donate it, it just seems like, and I've heard this for many years now, that you've got all this usable feed that gets wasted and destroyed, and it makes no sense. And the letter last year, you know, that went out did say, and it says that clipping bales must be destroyed. Please notify the office once the bales have been destroyed. And so I guess what I'm suggesting, and I hope that you'll agree with, is whether you do it case by case or whether you do it in some sort of standardized way, that there be a better approach to dealing with this, what I think is a very important issue.
I don't disagree that we could be a bit more sensitive with the language we use there.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully this next year you can and will be. One other issue that's really important in South Dakota right now, we've had for several years now, farmers in eastern, especially northeastern South Dakota, have been faced with flooding and drainage issues, and thousands of requests have been made to NRCS for wetland determination so that they know how to manage their land and still meet the conservation compliance provisions. And according to the most recent South Dakota NRCS report, we still have more than 2,000 undetermined wetlands in the state, which is 3 times or more as many as in any other surrounding state. So farmers are concerned, our state's farm and commodity organizations are concerned, and I believe that South Dakota NRCS office staff is making an effort to reduce this backlog, but so far, Mr. Secretary, the results just haven't materialized. And you know, I requested last summer a meeting, and there was some personnel from NRCS headquarters that attended in Aberdeen. We had more than 350 farmers there, which tells you kind of how important this issue is to them. And I know he came back to Washington having heard firsthand these frustrations from some of these farmers due to the backlog. But my question is, what more can you do at headquarters to help get this wetlands determination backlog under control?
Senator, we are trying to reduce the backlog. We did 23,000 wetland determinations last year. 2 things we've done and will continue to do. One is to create a different system for the determination of the wetlands. Some of the problems, I think, were based on the fact that local folks were making these determinations, and there was a concern about that. That's changed. And then secondly, we are trying to right-size staffing levels to where the issues are. So these numbers have come down. They obviously are not down to a place where you're satisfied, and I'm not satisfied either. However, it is important to note that we have had budget restrictions which have made it very difficult for us to have the staffing levels to do the work that you all want us to do. So hopefully when budgets are passed on, you all will be taking that into consideration as well. We're doing our level best with the personnel that we have.
And you know, in terms of resource personnel, all that, I understand that, but when our state is 3 times more than any of the surrounding states, it strikes me at least that we need to, there's got to be more allocation of resource and personnel to this in South Dakota. So I thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, just point of personal privilege, one of the next gentlemen to be up for a nomination of the FCA today is a South Dakotan, Dallas Tonsager. He served South Dakota farmers and ranchers for a really long time as FHA Director in South Dakota, Undersecretary at the Department of Agriculture for Rural Development, and for 5 years, from 2004 to 2009, served on the FCA board, position for which he is currently up. And so I wanted to welcome him and thank him for his service, and we look forward to processing his nomination. Mr. Chairman, thank you.